Let's bring in the RNC Chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel. She joins us on this Tuesday morning. Ronna, we just saw in that report from Kristen Fisher that even top Democrats, including Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, are walking away from the idea to dismantle or defund the police. In 2020, is that, as an issue, is it a loser, a political loser?
I think the president's been spot on talking about law and order and making sure that it's very clear he does not want to defund the police. You saw Nancy Pelosi sidestep it. I mean, remember, the Democrat Party has talked about abolishing ICE. You are seeing this defund the police movement continue. You've seen many Democrat governors and mayors across the country refuse to arrest protesters or rioters who are looting businesses. I think this is a big issue, and it's interesting to see Democrats not coming out strong and forcefully and saying absolutely we should not defund the police, which is the opposite of where the president is.
All right, let's talk about Colin Powell endorsing Joe Biden. This is what he had to say. Listen to this, Ronna.
I'm very close to Joe Biden on a social matter and on a political matter. I've worked with him for 35, 40 years, and he is now the candidate, and I will be voting for him.
So, Ronna, you've got that. No surprise, many people will say he admitted to voting for Hillary in 2016, and for past elections, he's voted for Democrats as well. What about your uncle? Your uncle reportedly is not going to vote for President Trump, and he's been out there protesting.
Again, no surprise there. He didn't vote for him in 2016. But here's what I'm going to say. The president has coalesced the Republican Party. He has the highest approval among Republicans for a lot of reasons. Rule of law justices that support the Constitution. I don't know how Colin Powell can say the president stepped away from the Constitution when he's put people like Kavanaugh and Gorsuch on the bench and rule of law justices across the board. The president's focused on deregulation, cutting taxes, energy independence, strengthening NATO. I mean, on every single front that Republicans care about, religious freedom, this president has been a warrior and a champion. And on the policy levels of our party, he has taken us further than past presidents ever have. And I'm troubled by Republican leaders not supporting the policies of our party that have been emboldened by President Trump. But I'll tell you what, the base of their party is solidly behind him.
President Bush 43 said through Freddie Ford, this story is not true. He has not talked to anybody about who he's voting. He's not involved in presidential politics. So another story in which there's some pushback from the people actually involved in it who were never questioned about it. But let's move on for a second, if we can. It looks as though the president meeting with law enforcement, sending a message yesterday in a roundtable televised. Do you also think it would be a good idea to meet with African-American leaders and find out what they think is the issues that would bring law enforcement closer together in urban communities? Do you think that would be an important element?
I think the president has consistently met with African-American leaders. I mean, let's not forget, this is the president that put economic opportunity zones in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This is the president who passed criminal justice reform, not Barack Obama, not Joe Biden. He's the one who passed criminal justice reform, giving a loan forgiveness to HBCUs. What this president has done hand in hand to help the black community and be part of these discussions has been unprecedented. And of course, he's going to continue that reach out and listening to black leaders on these important issues. And he reached out to George Floyd's family. He's been on the forefront of saying we need to have justice for George. We don't want to see anything like this happen in our country again. But the answer is not defunding the police, and we need to have law and order in this country as well.
Right. And so, Ronna, a moment ago when I asked you about politically, clearly there are politics involved in this for Nancy Pelosi to step away from the defunding and for Joe Biden to say that as well. And I asked if it was a political loser. Do you see this as an issue going into the election where the Republicans say, OK, we're the party of law and order, but at the same time, the Democrats see that there has been a change in attitude regarding policing that they feel they need to do something about? Why now?
Well, I think the president has, if you look at the speech he gave at NASA and the speech he gave in the Rose Garden, he's been spot on this issue, talking about the importance of bringing our country together and unifying around this very difficult moment that all of us as a united country recognize was horrific to see what happened to George Floyd. So, but the president's gone a step further, and he said the answer is not defunding the police and going after our law enforcement and removing law and order in our country, which you've seen Democrats not only push across the country, but exemplify in how they handled these riots, some of the riots in their cities, by just walking away from looters and people who are doing damage to black communities. So this is something that I think is going to be an issue heading into the election, especially with people like AOC and Rashida Tlaib, who are advising Joe Biden, talking about defunding the police and also abolishing ICE. I don't think this is going away anytime soon.
Okay, Ronna, what about hosting the RNC convention? Where are you looking? I've heard Nashville, I've heard Dallas, I've heard Florida, of course. What are you thinking now?
Well, the president loves North Carolina, and we really wanted to have it in North Carolina because he loves the people of North Carolina. And you have this Democrat governor who really, I think, has played politics and not given us guidelines to prevent us from holding the celebration. But everybody's coming to the table. We have all types of states, Oklahoma, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, that have come and said, we want to host your convention. We've been traveling. We will have to make a decision probably within the next week as to where we're going to have this celebration. It's going to be exciting. I'm really thrilled about it. I've been traveling as well. I will make sure to let you guys know first where we're going. Before, well, not before the president.
No, we appreciate that. Yeah, and we appreciate that. I feel bad for the people in North Carolina. Oh, the hotels and rent-a-cars. The governor had just wouldn't make the commitment. Yet you're going to go back to, the president's going to go back to rallies within 2 weeks. So they're going to really look stupid for turning down this lucrative event in a very purple state. But Ronna, I want to ask you, the word is that inside the White House, and you could easily punt on this, but I know you won't. They've been trying to get the president to soften his rhetoric, that his base loves the toughness, but independents don't. Are you one of those people trying to get the president to broaden out and soften up a little bit and be open to what's going on with the civil unrest? Or are you one of those people who just says, keep the hard line, the base is enough to win an election?
You know, the president is his best advisor. I mean, he really has a gut for the pulse of the American people. And I think it is so critical that he gets out on the road and starts having these rallies and hearing from his voters. But I think if you look at the speeches he's given that have not been given the coverage that they deserve, what he said at NASA, what he said in the Rose Garden, these are unifying speeches about bringing our country together in a very difficult time. But he's not going to budge on the importance of law and order in this country. And I think that is the right balance.
So, Ronna, how would these rallies work? You know, right now there are social distancing restrictions and guidelines all across the country regarding big crowds of thousands of people. Are we talking drive-ins? Are we talking what?
People honk?
Oh, I think there'll be full rallies. Listen, when we went to North Carolina and I spoke to the governor talking about the convention, we were talking about doing temperature checks, testing everybody before they came in. Lots of precautions to make sure we're putting the safety of convention goers first. I think that will be the same with the rallies. They'll make sure that they're putting safety procedures in place to make sure that every attendee is taken care of. And as you mentioned earlier, Brian, the rules keep changing, right? Asymptomatic people now aren't contagious. So there's a lot of things that we can do to make sure this is safe. But people want to get out and rally. They want to get out and start campaigning and being part of this election for this president. And the enthusiasm for him is through the roof.
Ronna, so good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
We can't buy cleats. We can buy liquor, but we can't buy shoes. It's unbelievable, these rules.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
I'm from Michigan. I know. Trust me.